Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick, and this is MSFS Flight Plans, a place where all I want to do is make sure you stay in the air by showing you some of the coolest, best looking, most interesting places in the world. And this today, guys, is my most recent labor of love. It's our trip down to Sao Paulo, Brazil. If you saw our most recent upload, that flight out in Guatemala, you know this one had to be revived from the aborted flight bin. So a huge shout out to our member Dan Buck, who is not only from the city, but sent me a big list of landmarks to check out. So just to prove my love and dedication to our community, I'm going to give this my very best for you guys. And on that note, I can pronounce some Spanish words, but you probably know they speak Portuguese down here. And I'm not sure exactly how the phonetic rules for that work, so apologies in advance on that front. And as always, I only know what the internet tells me about most of these places, so feel free to correct me as necessary down in the comments if I get any part of this wrong. And you can see we are in the Optica once again today, not because I like the plane all that much, but you know when you see us flying the Optica, and if you know I don't like it all that much, although it is a very well-built plane for the sim, something about it I just don't like. Maybe it's the look, but whenever we get into it, it's only because there are performance issues in the areas that we're flying over. So I gave you the whole story about the challenges with this place. I'll tell you a little bit more about that once we get up in the air if we have any dead time, but this is a very, very huge city, and there's all kinds of stuff going on the ground. I went through lots of different planes. There may have been one or two other simpler planes that we could fly, but those didn't have autopilot, and this thing has, hands down, the best field of view for a non-rotorcraft airplane. So whatever can be seen well, we will definitely get a good look at it. So let's go ahead and get her fired up, and we'll be on our way. Is that thing all the way on? Now it is. All right, fuel pump on. Fire it up. Fuel pump off. So, since we have a minute while I'm taxiing, I will tell you a little bit about... And by the way, if I sound a little bit different than usual, the weather has shifted down here in Florida. It's still warm, but it's cooler than usual, and it has been like misting rain and cloudy for a week. Today was the first day of sunshine we've gotten since last weekend. And whenever the weather changes like that, I'll usually get one of my seasonal colds, and I've got it now. I'm on the tail end of it now, but that's why I had to take a little bit more time to make this video, because I couldn't speak yesterday and the day before. But I think I've got the coughing under control, so that's good. So when I originally took this flight, the reason I was going to scrap it, if you haven't seen our last flight out to the ruins at Tikal, the whole scenery out here is just default scenery, which is kind of strange because there's a lot of other cities in South America and Central America that we've seen that look just phenomenal, even if they are mostly default. This one is almost like China-level default. The big things that we would have been able to see, like stadiums, are flat, a lot of them, if not all of them. A lot of the big buildings that would be big landmarks are going to be default. But I did find a huge set of add-on packs for it that were free from FlightSim, and there's no payware packs available, so I loaded up the 20 gigabytes of freeware packs from FlightSim, and it made the performance so bad that it barely got out of the teens. So I had to pull them all back out and make the decision of whether or not we were just going to look at the default stuff or try to fight our way through the performance issues. But the issues with those installed, it was just unflyable, even in this plane, and with all the graphics turned down. But I remember Dan Buck, who is the hero of this flight, who's from Sao Paulo, sent me a list of like 15 landmarks that we wanted to check out and gave me some details about all of them. And since he did that, we're going to take it. And there are a couple of individual landmarks that I was able to get add-ons for, all of which will be included in the video description. So as we go along, I'll tell you about those as well. And as always, if you'd like to take this exact flight, the link to this exact flight plan will be in the video description as well. You can pull that into a little NavMap and then pull it into the sim from there. And with that, let's give it one notch of flaps, check our altimeter, that looks good, landing lights on, and we already got our parking brake off, obviously, so let's do this. I think this whole flight will be about, well, it said an hour in the sim, but the sim also thinks this thing only goes 70 knots, and we'll be up over 100 no problem, so I'm guessing about 40 minutes. And there's a couple of other little spots around the edges that we're not going to look at that I'll show you on the little nav map at the end if you want to fly around and look at some more stuff. But this whole trip, all 40 minutes to an hour of it, is going to be within the city limits because this place is that big. Insanely huge. Alright, once we get down to the end of the runway here, I'm going to go ahead and kick our autopilot on. Let's get the flaps up. And then we'll be on our way. This airport is one of the add-ons, and our destination airport is also an add-on, and one of the big parks, and one of the stadiums. So those are the 4 add-ons I think that I've got included in this one. And it's just really a bummer that the that huge add-on pack was not working for us, because, I don't know, all things considered, if you didn't know what you were looking for down here, you know, if you weren't looking for a specific building or something like that, I don't know that you'd fly over it and say, well, that doesn't look good, because you just wouldn't know what it should look like unless you're from here. So I don't want to be too hard on it, but of course what we're doing here is looking for specific landmarks. So for what we're doing, all I'll say is I wish someone would make a landmark pack for it. That would be really cool, because I'm sure there's plenty of people that would love to fly over here and see all that stuff. Alright, autopilot on. And, you know, I don't really know what altitude is going to be best for this, so we'll just climb for a little while, and when we feel like we're at a good spot, we'll pause it, and I'll let you know when I'm pausing, so you can make a little mental note of that if you want. So just to give you some sense about how big this place is, well, for one thing, it is the most populated city in all the Americas, with over 21 million in the metro area, and over 12 million just in the, I guess, the central core, which makes it the 4th most populous city in the world. Mexico City, which we've been to, is next in line for the Western Hemisphere, and since we've already done a flight out there, I'll tell you, just to kind of frame it, how Sao Paulo stacks up in terms of the land area. Since neither of the cities are perfectly square, the best way I could think to try to compare them to each other was go into a little NavMap and measure each of the cities across the widest stretch of the dense buildings. So Mexico City was a little over 20 miles across, and this place is twice that. So, yeah, big. I mean, if you look down there, yeah, it's default stuff, but again, if you weren't looking for something in particular, doesn't look too bad. And one big thing I think you'll notice if you saw that Mexico City flight about Sao Paulo is, at least from the air, the socio-economic situation down here appears to be much better. You might recall those tiny little shanties that we saw covering most of Mexico City. There's going to be a few pockets of that down here, but most of the city is either high-rise apartments or more substantial-looking homes. And you may also notice that having anything even remotely resembling a yard out here is probably a real luxury. All right, I think I'm gonna stop at 4,000. I think that'll be pretty good. That's another 200 feet or so. And then we'll just pull the throttle back a little bit. Let's make sure our flaps are up. Yep, we're good. Probably turn our landing lights off now. The roads look okay. A little bit wavy. Not too bad. They took a lot of the buildings that I guess it didn't know what to do with them and made them into warehouses, but fortunately, there are a lot of warehouses out here, so you probably wouldn't know which ones were supposed to be and which ones are not. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and flatten out here and keep an eye on that throttle. We don't want to get going too fast. Alright, so I'm going to need some help from the locals for this first place we're about to see. One of the landmarks that Dan wanted me to check out is called the Ibirapuera Soccer Stadium, home of the Corinthians soccer team, which is one of the most famous teams in the country, apparently. And when I searched for the stadium in Google, it didn't pull anything up. So I searched for the home stadium of the Corinthians, and it took me to a place called the Neoquímica Arena, which I think may be the current name of the place that Dan was talking about. Unfortunately, it would have required us to go about 15 miles in that direction to go and see it, and even if we did, it rendered totally flat, so there wasn't anything worth the detour to check that out. However, as soon as we turn right here in just a little bit, there's a place that I bookmarked without even knowing what it was, because there's a huge collection of pools and fields and courts and a big stadium down there. And so once I started looking into that, it appears to be a whole complex that was built out in the early 20th century. Give the working class folks access to all the higher level competitions, which apparently had previously been reserved only for the wealthiest citizens. And I think the stadium that we're going to see on the western end of that complex may have been the original venue of the Corinthians club until they built the newer place out back behind us, which we're not going to go see because it's flat. But you'll see when we fly over it, they also have a lot of pools and courts for all kinds of other sports, so I'm not sure what they're using it for today, but I feel like I remember seeing that maybe it was used for the Pan Am Games at some point. So maybe that has something to do with all the additional facilities. And something you're going to notice about all of the stadiums out here, well, I certainly noticed it, you know, in the U.S., you have a huge stadium, maybe an arena next to it if it's downtown, maybe even a baseball park, but they're all like huge. But all these stadiums out here seem to be almost like community centers. They got all kinds of pools around them and gymnasiums and courts of all kinds surrounding all the stadiums, which is definitely different than it is in the U.S. Yeah, see, all these buildings are pretty default looking. I'm hoping, because I didn't fly back over downtown since I put the add-ons in, that the big landmarks that we're going to look for, I'm hoping that we'll be able to spot those as looking more like they should. We'll see. Alright, this complex is going to be coming up here on the left, which I think, again, was the original complex for the Corinthians. It's going to be right down here. It's actually pretty big. There's several sections of it. There's portions of it here, and then some on this side of this road over here. And then there's a big stadium over here somewhere, too. Oh, actually, sorry, it's over here. So the sports complexes, there's one here. This was another sports complex. I don't know if they're all related or not. And then here's the main one, and I think that may have been the original stadium of the Corinthians right there. Dan, let me know if I'm right about that. And that stadium, I think, is called Alfredo Schuring Stadium. But look at this. They got these little pools. I mean, it looks like a water park down there. It looks like a lazy river. And if we could see it better on the other side, they got some more fields over here. They got all kinds of courts down in here, like tennis courts, basketball courts. Very cool. All right, see this little thing right here? That's also a bit of an enigma for me. It's going to look like a horse track, and I think maybe it was at one time, like a horse racing track, because some of the reviewers that had been there said they still have some barns in the park next to it with some horse paraphernalia inside of them, but the modern descriptions say it's a public park with a big jogging circuit, so I don't think they race down there anymore, at least not with horses. See any yards anywhere? Nope. Luckily they got a lot of parks out here, though. Yeah, look at that thing. And it looks like the little barns are probably right over here. Okay, this next one's pretty interesting. It's just on this end of this airport up here, and it's the former site of the Carandiru Detention Center. I think I'm saying that right. Carandiru, maybe? Carandiru Detention Center. The name of the town is Carandiru. And on Friday, October 2nd of 1992, a group of inmates got into a brawl following a round of soccer. No surprise. They quickly devolved into a full-blown riot involving over 2,000 prisoners. That's going to be this area right here is where the place was. And when the 15 guards realized they were a little over their heads with all that, they called in the military, who were not at all interested in the ongoing negotiations with the local police. And so once they got in there, one of the enforcement guys thought that someone was shooting at him, so they started shooting back, firing as many as 5,000 rounds into the rioters, killing 111 and wounding 37 more. And though some of the higher-ups have since been killed under questionable circumstances, many people were put on trial for it, but nobody has been sentenced to anything. And it looks like this is still a prison. They said they tore the original place down, but that looks an awful lot like a prison yard, right? And I think there's a female detention center over here somewhere. But I believe this is where the original prison was out here, and they were left one cell block out there. There's like a museum. But that sounded like a horrific ordeal, and apparently it was a pretty big deal out here when it happened. And this river running down here is called the Tietê, and that's one of the two main waterways running through the city, and the other one's called the Pinheiros. And along the sides of both of them are the main traffic arteries. You'll see when we come over, because we're going to cross over it here in just a little bit. And according to our local correspondent, they are both an absolute nightmare during rush hour. And even on the satellite map, you can see they look pretty stressful because the traffic is pretty heavy on them. So this one runs all the way down here, and then it's going to kind of split off, and the other one's going to run down this way. And as we come around here, we're going to see a place called Allianz Park, or at least where it should be. That also rendered flat, unfortunately. And it's going to be right next to something that looks like it's a big part of the metro system. But this place, which I will show you, even though it's going to be flat, is the home stadium for the Palmeiras Soccer Club, the #1 rival of the Corinthians, that I mentioned earlier. And as you're going to see, if we can spot them, we'll see if we can see all those courts and parks and pools and stuff surrounding this one as well. Alright, where are you? Not quite there yet. So what we're going to do is circle all the way down around this way, come up around this side. Again, we're never really going to leave the city, come back up around this way, and then we're going to land at the main airport. All right, so there's the big traffic ways. And even on here you can see, especially when you get to the areas where it turns off to go to downtown. Well, that doesn't look too congested. But it runs right along that river all the way. What is that, like an 8, 9, 10 lane highway? Good grief. All right, there's the stadium. And I actually tried to set the sun, as you can see where the shadows are, to make the shadow that you can see in there in that flat stadium look a little bit more realistic. Look, so here's some more of the pools over here. We got the courts over here. I think one of these buildings is a gymnasium. But this place looked pretty substantial. And I don't know why it didn't get any elevation whatsoever, but all it got was a little warped bowl-shaped thing. Look how densely packed that is. Over 20 million people living out here. I mean, considering how bad the traffic is, I can't even imagine just trying to drive across town. Total nightmare. Yeah, we're getting a little bit of that stuttering and freezing. Well, the trains look pretty good. They got some elevation. That's nice. Oh, and then we got a freeze too. Yep, that's what it's going to be like, guys. If you take a plane out that's any more complicated than this, it may be even worse, so just a heads up with that. All right, up here to our left, this big open green area is going to be the campus of the University of Sao Paulo, one of 22 in the city, and by far the largest not just in the city, but the entire country. And I'll give you a second to take a stab at how many students you think are enrolled there. All of this is their property. There's almost 100,000 enrolled. That's insane. And so, of course, I had to go and see how that compared to the largest U.S. university. Go ahead, take your guess. It's Texas A&M with nearly 75,000. So USP here was founded in 1934 and today hosts no less than 24 different museums and galleries across their 11 campuses, with 4 of those being right here in Sao Paulo. Though none are even close to as big as this one. And one interesting feature that our man Dan pointed out is that this big little bonus lake that they've got right down here, he said that's called the Olympic Streak. And they use it for practice by the rowing team. That thing is 2 kilometers long. That's pretty cool. Wonder how deep that is. I didn't ask that. And that is the Pinheiros. That's the other river running down there, by the way. So the Olympic Streak runs right next to it. And let's see if we can see the Jockey Club, which is their horse racing track that's out here. I think we'll see it once we take this left turn. That is not accurate at all. That's actually a big open area. I don't know why that got that treatment. Look at that city. Good grief. And I think this is the airport we're coming into. You can just see the runway lights way over there. Look at the size of that campus, though. Well, they got some multicolored courts out here. Huge, huge place. All right, I'm looking for the horse track. There it is over there. See it? I think we'll probably get a better look at it when we come back around. But that's the Jockey Club. All right, get your popcorn out because we're about to see one of the few spots that look like they do in real life. And first up is going to be a giant complex called the Morumbi Stadium, home of the Sao Paulo Football Club. And it was first opened. This is going to be it right over here. And that is one of the add-ons. It was first opened in 1960 and has been renovated several times, most recently in 2016. Oh, look, a nice train yard. And I don't think many of these are actually like true on like transport train yards. I think a lot of these are for their massive metro system they have out here. Because I don't see too many other warehouses and stuff around that. But maybe it is. And like all the other stadiums, you'll see this one does have the pools and courts surrounding it. And the official capacity of this place is listed at 72,000, but at one time it could hold twice that amount. But people are a bit passionate about their local clubs around here, so they shrank it down twice to try to control the fighting. Look at that. That looks great, though, doesn't it? That is a big, big place. Can you imagine being twice that size at some point? Look at all these pools down there. Isn't that crazy? I mean, you could really make a day out of it, I guess. There's their soccer fields. They probably got some courts down there somewhere. Got a little track over here. All of them are like that. I don't know about you guys, but being in big crowds these days is just not my cup of tea, especially when you've got intense rivalries and lots of booze flowing. I get my fill of public brawls on YouTube these days, and I do enjoy watching them, but I just don't need to be within beer-slinging distance. And the Governor's Palace is... Ooh, we may have flown over it already, if it even rendered properly. Alright, this thing here is also an add-on. It's called the Ponte Estaiada, and it is a double cable-stay bridge that supports two of the main traffic arteries running through it. You can see that. We're getting some more popping going on out there. And just to the southeast of it, which I don't know if it rendered correctly, I think it would be this building right here, is called the Rado Globo building. And I only know it's iconic because Dan said that's where the local news is broadcast. I guess it's kind of like the big networks in the U.S. that have the scenes of Manhattan in the background, if they're broadcasting from New York. Well, these guys use the bridge as their backdrop down here. And I thought that was a neat little touch of local flavor, so thank you for that, Dan. And on that note, getting this level of insight about a flight is like a dream come true for me. As our community grows, I would love to get to the point where every one of our tours can be supplemented by info from people who are familiar with these areas, at least more so than me, which wouldn't take that much. So if you want to see your hometown on our channel, just let me know. I'll do a test flight to make sure it all checks out for our high-level overviews. And if it does, you can just give me a list of all the interesting spots to see and talk about, and we'll show the world the place that made you. When it comes to famous people from Sao Paulo, there are quite a few of them. Online I found a list of at least 50 of them, and most of them I didn't recognize, but anyone from Brazil would probably know them. They seem to be mostly actors and sports people. But the one name I did recognize was Anderson Silva of UFC fame. So if you're into that kind of thing, he's from here. And if you're planning a trip to this area in real life, you can pack like you're heading to the parks in Orlando. It's about the same southern latitude as Miami is to the north, classifying it as subtropical. And the average lows in the winter months are mid-60s, while the summer typically gets in the balmy mid-80s. But apparently it can get pretty toasty down here if the winds stop blowing off the ocean. See this thing right here? I wanted to put a dot on that, and it really looks like that. When we get to the side, you'll see it has some elevation. It looks like a big tent because that's kind of what it is. That is a huge Catholic church. And it's an open-air place, so you go in there, and if you look at it from the ground, it's all opened underneath there. And they said they can hold 25,000 people in there. And I think that was built fairly recently, too. But that is quite an impressive building for a church. And here we have the Interlagos racetrack. And this was first opened in 1940. And the name literally means between the lakes. As you can see, there's one here and one over here. And those are man-made, by the way. They plug those up for power and water for the city. And today the track is nearly 2.7 miles long and hosts just about every kind of race that you can imagine. But it looks like the really big event down here is the annual Sao Paulo Grand Prix Formula 1 race. And as we come around the side here, you'll see they also have a little kart track over here. And I don't know if this stuff here is water, or if you know some of those tracks on the hard turns will have like sand in case the cars fly off the side. But it kind of looks like water, and there's something written in that spot over there. But that looks pretty cool. Although I don't see any pools or fields or basketball courts around this place. But it looks good. Alright, so the city kind of starts to taper off over here, and if you just keep going that way, and there's a bridge that looks like it probably looks okay if we went down there. But the Atlantic Ocean's not too much further down that way. Big power plant over there. So it looks like this is probably one of the hydro dams they've got, and then I found another one back behind us on that other lake. And you can see all this stuff looks a little bit blurry. In other parts of the country we've flown over, even the default stuff looks better where the substations are. But again, for some reason, despite being such a massive city, just didn't get much love from the sim. Alright, so we got a couple minutes before our next spot, so I'll try to squeeze in a little history about Sao Paulo. As with all other parts of the Americas before Europeans arrived, this place was originally inhabited by indigenous tribes going back at least 3,000 years. And the Portuguese beat the Spanish down here and established a Jesuit college of all things out here in 1554. And I'll show you the location of that once we get downtown. And after that, for the next 200 years, this place was just a poor farming community because it was kind of difficult to get to. While all that stuff was being built up along the coastlines, which are not difficult to get to, for a very long time, this place was the only inland village in all of Brazil. You see, that doesn't look bad. You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd say that, yeah, that's what it looks like. And when you look on the map, that is pretty much what it looks like. Man. You better like being close to people if you're living out here. I guess you just get used to it like anything else, though. When gold was found in the region north of Sao Paulo in the 1690s, things picked up a little down here as it became a stopping off point for people traveling north from the coast. And by the end of the 18th century, all the gold had been mined out, so the economy shifted to sugarcane and then coffee plantations. The start of the 20th century brought an industrial revolution, then a banking revolution, then several violent real revolutions involving the locals, the local government, the local military, and eventually the federal military, all of which was as violent and bloody as it sounds. But nowadays it is quite a civil and quite modern city, boasting the largest GDP in Latin America. Alright, this huge green space here, I couldn't figure out what the proper name of it was because there was all kinds of other little bookmarks all over it. But within it we're going to find the Sao Paulo Expo Center, which I think is this giant thing right here. Yeah, that's what that is. One of their expo centers. And the city zoo and the botanical gardens. So the zoo is going to be down here, and they even have a little dinosaur exhibit, of course, like any good zoo should these days. And there may even be some research facilities if my translation abilities are anything close to being in the ballpark. So I think there's a big planetarium out here. None of this looks... I remember looking at the planetarium because it had a big dome, so I think that's what that is. And then here's the zoo out here. Their botanical garden was over here. But that looks pretty neat. Can we see any dinosaurs? I highly doubt it. And this is their parking area out here. A little bit fuzzy. And there's what we're going to come into. So we're going to come out around here, come back around the top of the city, and then come right back in there. So here's a few fun facts about Sao Paulo. Number one, with over 7 million registered vehicles in the city, this place is designated the 7th worst in the world when it comes to traffic snarls. So Dan was right about how congested it gets along those rivers there. And I read the average commuter can plan on spending about 102 hours per year waiting in traffic jams. Sounds like fun. And due to fact number one, Sao Paulo also has the largest helicopter fleet in the world, utilizing any of its 210 heliports. Every 5 minutes, at least 4 choppers are taking off or landing from atop the buildings around town. And it also has an incredibly diverse population, boasting the largest Japanese community outside of Asia, the largest Italian community in the country, and the largest LGBT community in Latin America. And they said they have a huge, like 2 million attendee gay pride parade out here every year. And I know those guys know how to party, so I can imagine they have a pretty raucous time once that thing gets fired up. Guys and gals, I guess. Alright, we're going to come up on a longer green strip up ahead, and that's called Independence Park. And they've got a big Brazilian history museum on this end of it. It's right behind our little pillar right now. We'll see it better in a second. But the Brazilian History Museum is going to be on this end of it, and then their Monument of Independence is going to be on the other end. And we'll take a look and see how those two things rendered, because they look really neat on the satellite map. But this site was chosen because it was a location of where Emperor Pedro I, or maybe Pedro IV, I saw him called both, it's where he proclaimed Brazil's independence from Portugal on September 7th of 1822. So that's like their 4th of July down here. Alright, so there's where the museum is. And I read that this was opened in 1895, but only reopened again recently in 2022 after being closed for almost a decade for renovations. Yeah, that's not really... It looks really, really cool. It looks kind of like the palace at Versailles, the architecture of it. And I think that's what they were trying to do when they built it. You should check out that on the ground. It looks pretty cool. And then here's where the big monument is, but it doesn't look anything like that either. They just put a square there. See all that stuttering we're getting? And I've got everything turned down super low. You can imagine if you took a more complicated plane, which is just too bad. If some of these cities that look rough now look good in 2024, I'll just delete this one and come back out and take a better look at them. But as far as, you know, our biggest demographic on this channel is Americans, then UK, and then Brazil after that. So I want to make sure we came out here for you guys. And there's one of their helipads. But apparently a lot of these tall buildings have helipads on them too. Alright, so we're coming up on the downtown area here. It's hard to tell that this is downtown because everything kind of looks like that. I guess the tall building density is a little bit more intense out here. So I don't think anything out here that we're going to try to look at looks like it does in real life, so I'll just kind of point to where it should be. The first place is the Sao Paulo Cathedral. And though it's very old school Gothic in appearance, it's rather modern, being completed in 1954. After only 40 years of construction, which may be a record for cathedral building. Let's see if we can spot it. It's really tucked down in here. But they put it on the site of the first church to ever go up down here, which I think was in 1616. And right over here is the spot of the original Jesuit college. So that's where all the magic happened. That was the first thing to ever go up out here. That's where the first settlement was. Oh man, what a bummer. That little metro station didn't come out very good. There's a cathedral, also flat. Dang it, that's too... I mean, come on. You gave elevation to everything else. There's no helipad. Well, at least it makes it easy to spot. And I was going to try to show you the Edificio Altino Orantes, which is known as Sao Paulo's Empire State Building, because it kind of looks like it, but I don't see anything that looks like the Empire State Building, because everything is default looking, unfortunately. And it's not nearly as tall as the actual Empire State Building. It's only 36 floors and 528 feet versus 102 floors and over 1,400 feet for the real deal. But when it was complete in 1947, it did grab the crown for Sao Paulo's tallest building and held on to it for 2 decades. And the tallest current building is called the Platina 220, but we won't see that because it was finished in 2022. And that was just 564 feet, which is kind of interesting. I mean, they have tons and tons of tall buildings out here. I mean, I've never seen this many tall buildings all in one city, but they don't have any of the true blue, like, mega skyscrapers out here at all. The tallest building's not even 600 feet. And I don't think they have earthquake problems or anything like that out here, so I don't really know why they didn't go super tall with anything. Alright, and this thing here, which is also flat, it's a museum dedicated to soccer. And that was just opened, I think, in 2008. And from the air you can see that, well, I mean, you can tell it's a stadium, but everything's just flat around there. This is their parking. And Dan, you'll have to help me out on this one too. I don't know if this was an old stadium that they converted into a museum, or if they specifically built the museum to look like a soccer stadium, which would definitely be cool if they did. But let me know about that. I mean, what a bummer. I'm sorry, all you guys that live out here. I'm sorry that you haven't gotten any more attention than this. All your coolest stuff is just flat. That is just too bad. We'll go check out Rio at some point and see if that looks any bit better. Oh, it looks like we're going to fly right over the Jockey Club. Alright, out here is another add-on, but we're not going to get really, really close to it because we got to come into this airport, and that's called Ibirapuera Park, or Puerta maybe. And that's kind of like their central park, and they've got all kinds of art museums and stuff like that down there. And they said they get nearly 15 million people passing through that spot each year, and that opened in 1954 to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the founding of Sao Paulo. Alright, this last spot is probably going to be the hardest of all to spot, but it's interesting, so I want to tell you about it. Just to the right side of the runway on the right, we're going to come in on the one on the left, so the right side of this one here, which is 17R, there's a little spot called the July 17th Memorial, and that's a tribute to a TAM Airlines flight number 3054, which skidded off the end of that runway on July 17th of 2007, killing all 187 passengers and crew of the A320 and 12 more on the ground. And I'll try to remember to look out the right window to see if we can see it. And if you look at a picture of the memorial on the ground, there's a mulberry tree in the center of it, which somehow managed to survive the explosion, which is interesting. And I watched a digital recreation of the flight. There was some, like, closed circuit. Gosh, look at this graphics just popping in and out like that. Well, it is what it is. But this whole area is elevated. It looks like it may even be like 100 feet above the surrounding terrain. And it was coming in from this direction, and when it got to the end of the runway, it was real rainy out, and apparently the airport knew that there was some problems stopping. Even the day before, a couple planes had trouble stopping. It jumped over this highway next to it, and that's when it hit the big warehouse that was over there. Alright, so I'll take the autopilot off, and we'll start coming down some, give it some flaps. And I think that even maybe built some extensions onto the runway after that, but they had to resurface it and create some more channels for the rainwater to run off. Alright, so right down in here is where the memorial should be. See the little circular thing? I think that's it, right down there. Let's see. Yep, that's it right down there. The circular thing. I guess it hit the warehouse and then went over and hit a gas station. That's when it really burst into flames. Sorry, I came over a little bit so we could get a good look at it. Yeah, see that circle in the middle? I think that's where the mulberry tree is, and it looks like there's even a tree in there. I was so interested in looking at it, I didn't get enough flaps down. But this is a pretty long runway, so I think it'll be okay. So I'll just pull off to the left once we get up here, and then I'll pull over a little nav map and we'll take a look at everything. And then Sao Paulo will officially be in the books. But how about the size of this city, huh? Unbelievable. Up next is the area around Norway. We have a member from Norway who's going to give us some sites to check out. And also got a request for South Africa. And I know there's some add-on packs available for that. Payware, I think. Probably even some freeware too, and I know it looks good too. So we'll check out those two. And I've got another short hop kind of tickling the back of my mind too, so maybe we'll squeeze that in there as well. Alright, flaps up. And I think there's several payware add-ons for this airport, but dang it, with the city looking like it does, I just don't know, unless I lived here, if I'd be flying out of here that much. Because it is a big airport. Alright, is there a little way to get over that road? No, we won't hunt for that. I'm going to pull over in this grass right here. Boy, imagine living in those houses. Talk about noise pollution. We'll just come to a little taxiway here. Okay. Alright, parking brake on. Our flaps all the way up. Yep. And let's see if I can actually manipulate this to turn this off. Oh, oh. We got it. Alright. Okay. So here's where... Let me show you... I'll show you where we went. Well, first of all, let's zoom way out. So here's the coast. You can see we're actually pretty close to the coast. And then Rio is up in this area up here. Also a pretty big place, but not nearly as big as this. And a really, really cool flight, especially if you want to do it at night. One of my favorite flights I took was taking off down here. They got a couple really neat airports out here. Let me just show you. I love taking off from this one, but it's pretty short. I'm sure you guys have been there before. I don't have to tell you about that. But I flew down here from Rio de Janeiro, came along the coast. There's some really cool little towns and stuff out here. Flew in this way as the sun was setting, obviously from this direction. Just looked absolutely beautiful over the cityscape. It was incredible. And again, if you're not looking for the specific stuff that we are on these flights, you probably wouldn't notice much of a difference other than the performance issues, which you'll probably suffer, especially if you have a more complex plane. All right, so we took off from our airport up here. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. And this is the spot where I think the Corinthians are playing these days. It's called the Neoquímica Arena. And you can see that looks pretty cool, doesn't it? But it was totally flat. They had a big metro station out here. So that would have been a little bit off of our track. And just to go down there and see that, I didn't think it would be worth it. But Dan did mention that. And until someone does an add-on for it, it's probably not worth checking out. All right, here is where I think they originally were playing, the Corinthians. And here's that sports complex I was talking about. So look at these pools and stuff they have out here. Lots of pools. And over here is another sports complex. And then over here on the other side of the road, they got something else going on with some sports stuff. So sports is a big deal out here, which is great. Get people out of their sim pits for a little while, right? And then here is where that park was that I think used to be a horse track now. And there's where the little barns are, I'm guessing, because these look like probably houses or something out here, or apartments. But now apparently that's a pedestrian track. And then here's where that prison was. And I think this building right here is what was marked for the museum. And I think this is the female detention center, if I was translating that correctly. This looks an awful lot like an active detention center. And I read that they turned the big prison into a park. So I'm guessing the prison where the riot was out in here. And correct me about that if I'm wrong. So here's the Tietê that runs through here. Oh, and they have another stadium. I totally missed that one. And there's some courts around it. No swimming pools for that one, though. Look at this traffic. Look at this. Oh, my gosh. Look at all that backed up there. Oy. That's a lot. All right, so we come over here, and there's where the Allianz Park is. And that was the one that was also flat, but you can tell that's pretty cool, too. And, of course, they got swimming pools. And then we came around here to our first add-on, which was... Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is the university. Look how big that place is. And there's their big... there's the Olympic streak where the rowing team does their thing. That is massive. 100,000 students enrolled. But it's probably at all the campuses, but you know they got to have several tens of thousands at that one, too. The Jockey Club. And then there was the stadium that we did have the add-on for, which did look great. And then there's the Governor's Mansion, which I don't think looked like that. I forgot to take a look at it, but I think that just rendered as something that looked a lot more like a warehouse. So this is the Capitol and the Governor's residence at this point, I think. That's what they were saying in the little wiki article I pulled up. And then here's that bridge. Check that thing out. And then here's the tower where they broadcast the news from. Is that it? I think it is. I think that's it right there. Oh, no, it's this one right here. The Rede Globo building. This is it right here. So I guess they just shoot out one of these windows and they have the bridge in the background. Very cool. Not one of those buildings is over 600 feet, but look at all, you can see the helicopter pads. Almost every tall building has one on top of it. Look at this. Man. All these do. That is crazy. I bet the helicopter, because they have so many of them, I wonder how much like a helicopter taxi ride costs if you just want to get around the traffic. Okay, then we came down here. Here's our big church, the tent church. They can hold 25,000 people. Here's our big track, which looked really just like that. Although we can't see. There was something written in here in the sim, but there's obviously nothing written in there now. That's cool. Here's the big lakes. And we saw one of the dams is right there. And the other one, where was it? Well, I'm not going to search for it right now. Then we came up to the park where the zoo is. There's their parking area. The planetarium, I think, is this thing right here. There's a little dome on top of it. And then here's where the little dinosaur area was if you're going to visit the zoo in person. The convention center and the botanical gardens out here. And then here's their Independence Park. And it looks like it's still under construction or renovation there. And they even have a helicopter pad on top of that. And a pool. Man, a park pool. Stadium pool. Building pool. And helicopter pad. Another huge pool. And then there's their monument. Obviously, it looks nothing like it did in the sim. And then we came up here, and here's where the meat of the historical stuff is for this area. So here's where the Jesuit College was, right here. And then here's where the cathedral is, which, golly, made flat. Unbelievable. More helicopter pads. And they have another church there that I just bookmarked, but I'm sure it probably looked just like all the others did. And I thought this was kind of a neat-looking building. Look at that thing. It's some apartments, but it's kind of got that wavy look to it. And then where is their Empire State Building? Here's the one they call the Empire State Building of Sao Paulo. And if you see it from the ground, it does kind of have that same profile. And there's a little park that I bookmarked. And they also have a huge market out here, which on all of the sites that I went to that said, 25 things you have to do in Sao Paulo, every one of them said that you had to go to this municipal market. Apparently they have like a lot of exotic fruits and vegetables in there. And then here's the football stadium, or soccer if you're from the U.S. Look at that place. It doesn't have a lot of elevation, but it was just so flat that you could actually see the terrain curving underneath it. So let me know, Dan, if they built that just to be a museum or if that is an old stadium of some kind, because that's pretty cool. And then we have their big park here, their Central Park, and this is a huge modern art museum here, and they have a huge statue right here, which I'm sure did not look like it's supposed to in the sim. And that had some significance as well, which we didn't have time to go into. And another huge stadium there. Man, oh man, stadiums everywhere. And then we came down here to the airport, and here's where the memorial to July 17th is, which actually looked correct, and I bet it was part of the add-on for that airport, so they probably cleaned that up. I'm guessing that's where the little mulberry tree is right there. And in the sim, you could actually even see the extensions that they had built onto the runway, which don't appear to be showing up here in a little NavMap. And then we came in for our landing. So, again, Dan Buck, thanks. I hope I did the best I could with this. Thank you so much. There was so much to see out here, I didn't even know where to start. And if you hadn't have pointed to the spots that we did check out, I don't know what we would have actually looked at. I mean, some of the stuff is big enough to see from the air, like this track, and some of the big parks and stuff. But other than that, it was a lifesaver. So thank you. You saved the flight. So stick around, guys. I had an absolute blast. Learned a lot, as always. Can't wait to see you all again in the skies. Later.